The story of Thailand and Cambodia is not just a story of neighboring countries. It is a narrative steeped in centuries of history. Cultural exchange, territorial disputes, and political tension. Because these two nations share more than a border, they share a complex past where kingdoms rose and fell, cultures intertwined, and ambitions collided, creating a legacy that still echoes in modern times. And at the center of much of this tension is the disputed territory along their border, particularly around the ancient temple of Preah Vihear, a UNESCO World Heritage Site perched dramatically on a cliff, whose ownership has sparked nationalistic fervor, military standoffs, and political clashes for decades. The conflict is not merely about land, but about pride, identity, historical legacy, and control over cultural symbols that define each nation's narrative. And it is a clash that has drawn international attention, UN involvement, and passionate debates in both domestic and global media. To understand why Thailand and Cambodia have fought, and sometimes nearly gone to war, one must look beyond headlines and military movements into a rich tapestry of historical empires, colonial interventions, nationalist movements, and the lingering effects of borders drawn without full regard for local realities. Because this clash is as much psychological and cultural as it is territorial. And as we dive into the history, the causes, the conflicts, and the resolutions, or lack thereof, one begins to see that the Thailand-Cambodia clash is not simply a regional dispute, but a reflection of how history, pride, and politics can shape the destiny of nations, often repeating patterns across generations, and how deeply the past continues to influence the present, making this story one of tension, identity, and unresolved ambition. To understand the ongoing clash between Thailand and Cambodia, one must first delve into the centuries-long history that shaped both nations, because their borders, empires, and identities have been intertwined for over a millennium, creating a backdrop where disputes are rooted in culture, history, and power struggles, rather than modern politics alone. During the height of the Khmer Empire, from the 9th to the 15th century, Cambodia was the dominant power in the region, constructing magnificent temples such as Angkor Wat and Preah Vihear, which became symbols of its cultural and religious influence, while surrounding territories, including parts of what is now Thailand, were often under Khmer control or influence, leaving a legacy of shared architecture, language elements, and cultural traditions. Over time, the rise of Thai kingdoms, such as Sukhothai and Ayutthaya, began to challenge Khmer dominance, leading to repeated conflicts, invasions, and shifting control of border territories. And even centuries later, these historical claims continue to influence national narratives, with both nations referencing ancient maps, inscriptions, and treaties to support their claims. European colonialism further complicated these relationships, as French Indochina drew arbitrary boundaries that did not fully account for historical or ethnic realities, placing territories under Cambodian control while Thailand remained independent, creating fertile ground for disputes over ownership, heritage, and governance. And as Cambodia regained independence and modern Thailand consolidated its borders, these historical grievances were never fully resolved, simmering beneath the surface and occasionally erupting into military standoffs, diplomatic tensions, and nationalist campaigns, proving that the clash between Thailand and Cambodia is not a recent phenomenon, but a centuries-old narrative where history, pride, and territorial ambition converge in ways that continue shape both nation. The colonial era played a pivotal role in shaping the territorial disputes between Thailand and Cambodia, because during the 19th and early 20th centuries, European powers, particularly France, entered Southeast Asia with little regard for existing historical claims, local kingdoms, or ethnic boundaries, creating borders that were often arbitrary and contested from the very beginning. Cambodia became part of French Indochina in 1863, and the French colonial administration undertook extensive mapping and border delineation, sometimes negotiating with the Kingdom of Siam, modern Thailand, to establish agreements over disputed lands, including the areas surrounding the Preah Vihear Temple and other strategic highlands. Yet these treaties were often vague, inconsistently enforced, and interpreted differently by each side, sowing confusion and tension that would last for generations. Meanwhile, Thailand, known then as Siam, managed to maintain its independence, but had to cede several territories under French pressure, fueling a sense of historical grievance and national pride that continues to influence Thai attitudes toward Cambodia and border disputes, as infrastructure, maps, and administrative control were formalized. Both nations developed legal and cultural claims to the same lands, backed by historical narratives, ancient inscriptions, and religious heritage sites, making any simple resolution difficult. And when Cambodia gained independence in 1953, these colonial-era boundaries became central to its national sovereignty, prompting disputes over temples, highlands, and access to resources, which were not merely about land, but about identity, heritage, and pride. Thus, the colonial period did not merely impose foreign control, it crystallized territorial questions and left behind a legal and historical framework that would fuel decades of clashes, proving that the modern Thailand-Cambodia conflict is deeply rooted decisions made over a century ago, where Colonia, the Preah Vihear temple dispute, is far more than a territorial disagreement. It is a clash of national pride, history, and identity that has defined Thailand-Cambodia relations for decades, because this ancient Hindu temple, built during the Khmer Empire in the 11th and 12th centuries, is considered a masterpiece of Khmer architecture, intricately carved into sandstone cliffs, and it symbolizes not only Cambodia's spiritual and cultural heritage, but also its historical dominance in the region, making it a site of immense national importance. The temple sits on a 525-meter high cliff, offering commanding views of the surrounding plains and highlands, which adds strategic value in addition to its historical significance, and its location has fueled disputes over which nation rightfully owns the land surrounding it. The conflict escalated in the 20th century, particularly after Cambodia gained independence from France in 1953, as Thailand and Cambodia interpreted colonial-era maps and treaties differently, both claiming sovereignty over the temple and its adjacent land, which led to decades of diplomatic tension and occasional military confrontations. In 1962, the International Court of Justice, (ICJ) ruled that the temple itself belongs to Cambodia, but the surrounding land remained contested, leaving the dispute unresolved in practice. The tension reignited in the 2000s when both countries deployed troops to the border, leading to armed clashes in 2008, 2009, and 2011, causing casualties, displacement, and international concern. Beyond maps and treaties, the dispute is deeply emotional for citizens of both nations, with Thailand seeing the temple as part of historical Siamese influence and Cambodia viewing it as a symbol of enduring Khmer civilization. Thus, Preah Vihear is not just stones and carvings, it is a focal point of national identity, historical pride, and territorial ambition, representing why the Thailand-Cambodia clash is as much about culture and honor. The Thailand-Cambodia conflict over territory, particularly around the Preah Vihear temple and surrounding border areas, has not remained a matter of diplomacy alone. It has repeatedly escalated into armed clashes that have tested both nations' military capabilities, strained international relations, and underscored the volatility of unresolved historical grievances. Because the combination of strategic highlands, national pride, and unclear borders has created flashpoints where even minor incidents can ignite violence. Throughout the 20th century, tensions simmered quietly, with both sides maintaining military outposts near the disputed areas, while diplomatic channels struggled to mediate agreements that would satisfy nationalist sentiments on both sides. However, after the International Court of Justice ruling in 1962, which granted Cambodia sovereignty over the temple but left surrounding land ambiguously demarcated, skirmishes became more frequent, culminating in major confrontations in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The 2008-2011 period was particularly volatile, with Thailand and Cambodia both deploying hundreds of soldiers, engaging in artillery and gunfire exchanges, and causing casualties among troops and civilians, displacing local villagers and creating humanitarian concerns. These clashes were fueled not just by territorial ambitions, but also by political pressures, nationalist rhetoric, and the symbolic value of Preah Vihear as a cultural emblem. International organizations, including ASEAN and the United Nations, called for restraint, and both nations eventually agreed to ceasefire negotiations and troop withdrawals. Yet tensions periodically reignite due to nationalist sentiment, unclear boundaries, and the temple's symbolic significance. Thus, the Thailand-Cambodia clashes demonstrate that historical disputes can manifest violently, even in modern times, showing how deep-rooted pride, colonial legacies, and contested heritage. The Thailand-Cambodia clashes are deeply rooted in a combination of territorial claims, political motivations, and cultural significance, making the dispute far more complex than a simple border disagreement, because each factor feeds into the other, creating a cycle of tension that has persisted for decades. Territorially, the primary contention revolves around the areas surrounding the Preah Vihear temple and other border regions where historical maps, colonial-era agreements, and natural landmarks have been interpreted differently by each country, leaving ambiguity that both nations exploit to assert sovereignty, while the fertile lands, strategic highlands, and natural resources in these areas add an economic and strategic dimension to the dispute. Politically, the conflict is amplified by nationalist movements, domestic pressures, and governments seeking to demonstrate strength, as both Thailand and Cambodia have used the border issue to rally public support, distract from internal challenges, or assert legitimacy. making compromises politically costly despite international mediation. Culturally, the temple and surrounding lands hold immense symbolic value. For Cambodia, Preah Vihear represents Khmer civilization, independence, and national pride, while for Thailand, it is a reminder of historical Siamese influence and heritage, creating an emotional connection that inflames public sentiment and complicates negotiations. These overlapping territorial, political, and cultural dimensions ensure that the conflict is never purely legal or diplomatic, but also deeply emotional and symbolic, explaining why, even decades after the ICJ ruling, the clash continues to flare periodically, proving that the Thailand-Cambodia dispute is a multi-dimensional struggle where history, pride, politics, and territory intersect, making resolution a delicate balancing act that must account for both national interests and centuries of shared, contested heritage. The Thailand-Cambodia dispute has repeatedly drawn international attention as the combination of territorial conflict, cultural heritage, and military clashes posed risks not only to bilateral relations, but also to regional stability, prompting the involvement of organizations such as the United Nations, ASEAN, and the International Court of Justice, because the conflict touches on issues of sovereignty, historical justice, and human security, making it a concern beyond the two nations directly involved. In 1962, the International Court of Justice issued a landmark ruling granting Cambodia sovereignty over the Preah Vihear temple itself, a decision intended to settle one of the central disputes. Yet the surrounding lands remained a grey area, leaving room for continued tensions and sporadic military incidents, demonstrating the limits of legal intervention when emotional and nationalist sentiments are at stake. In the 21st century, particularly during the 2008-2011 clashes, ASEAN acted as a mediator, facilitating dialogue, calling for troop withdrawals, and urging both parties to exercise restraint, while the UN encouraged adherence to international law and peaceful negotiation, highlighting the importance of neutral oversight in preventing escalation. Mediation efforts often involved monitoring troop movements, deploying observers, and establishing communication channels between the militaries and governments, emphasizing that diplomacy requires both trust building and careful management of public perception. Despite these interventions, progress has often been slow, as domestic politics, nationalist pressure, and historical grievances limit the willingness of leaders to compromise. But international involvement has been crucial in preventing full-scale war, containing skirmishes, and maintaining long-term peace, proving that external mediation plays a critical role in managing disputes that are simultaneously legal, cultural, and territorial in nature. The Thailand-Cambodia border has witnessed numerous incidents and skirmishes over the decades, reflecting how unresolved historical grievances and disputed territories can escalate into violent confrontations, because these events illustrate the delicate balance between nationalism, military strategy, and diplomacy, where a single misstep can quickly ignite tensions that reverberate across the region. One of the earliest significant incidents occurred in the 1960 seconds following the ICJ ruling on Preah Vihear, as both countries deployed troops to assert presence near the temple despite legal clarity, resulting in minor clashes and heightened rhetoric, signaling that legal resolutions alone could not fully address historical and emotional disputes. Fast forward to the 21st century. tensions escalated dramatically between 2008 and 2011, when armed confrontations at the temple and surrounding lands led to casualties on both sides, the displacement of civilians, and temporary closures of border crossings, while artillery exchanges and sniper fire created fear among villagers who had lived in relative peace for generations. These clashes were often triggered by nationalistic demonstrations, miscommunications between military units, or symbolic ceremonies that each side interpreted as provocations, demonstrating how cultural pride and military posture intertwine. International observers, including UN and ASEAN representatives, were deployed to monitor the situation and mediate ceasefires, but sporadic incidents continued due to the ambiguous boundaries and the temple's symbolic importance. These major incidents reveal that the Thailand-Cambodia conflict is not just historical or legal, but a living, dynamic struggle in which emotions, sovereignty, and local realities collide, making the border one of Southeast Asia's most sensitive and enduring flashpoints, even in modern times. The Thailand-Cambodia clash is fueled not only by history and territory, but also by nationalism and the power of public opinion, which magnify tensions and often constrain political leaders from finding compromise, because in both nations, the disputed areas and the Preah Vihear temple are more than land. They are symbols of national pride, identity, and historical legacy. And this symbolic significance is amplified by media coverage, political rhetoric, and social sentiment. In Thailand, news outlets and politicians frequently highlight the historical presence of Siamese influence in the contested regions, portraying the dispute as a defense of sovereignty and heritage, which mobilizes public opinion and strengthens national unity, but can also harden negotiating positions. While in Cambodia, the temple represents the enduring legacy of the Khmer Empire, independence, and cultural achievement, making any concession politically and emotionally unthinkable for leaders, as citizens view the dispute as a matter of honor and national identity. Social media and traditional media play a critical role in shaping perceptions, reporting troop movements, military clashes, and ceremonial events in ways that stir patriotism and nationalistic fervor, often intensifying tensions and putting pressure on governments to take strong stances. Public opinion in both countries is also influenced by historical education, cultural narratives, and collective memory, which frame the dispute not as a localized conflict, but as a continuation of centuries-old struggles for respect, recognition, and legitimacy. Consequently, nationalism and media amplify the dispute beyond the legal or territorial, making it a deeply emotional issue that affects diplomacy, security, and bilateral relations, and proving that the Thailand-Cambodia conflict is as much a battle of hearts and minds as it is a territorial disagreement.